Hi guys, this is Mike from Eldorado Guitars, and I wanted to do a short follow-up video on my Mark VII video that I talked about yesterday. Because I said that while I thought the Mark VII was very cool, and while I like the 2C Plus mode a lot, I made a comment that it doesn't really sound like a real 2C, and I said I would explain that some more, and then I don't think I ever really did. So I thought I would just make a quick video kind of explaining what I mean. This is a bit more about the way the amps are designed than about sounds, but I am going to do some sounds at the end just to show you kind of what I mean. So we've got the Mark VII here, the brand new one, right, 2023, on loan from my friend Taylor. Thank you, Taylor. And then up here is my 83 Mark IIc Plus DRGX. So what is the primary difference between these two amps, and why do people say things like, oh, the newer ones, the newer Marks don't sound like the older Marks? To me, there's two reasons why, and neither you can really do anything about, I guess, but it's kind of just important to understand. So the first is transformers. So the transformers that are used in the old 80s boogies, whether it's a Mark II, Mark IIc Plus, Mark III, they're made differently, and this is just like old Marshalls and stuff too, right? A lot of the magic of those amps is in the transformers, right? And so they just don't make them like they used to anymore, and I know I sound like an old boomer, but a lot of it has to do with like environmental regulations and specs and like parts that they don't make anymore, and you know, all that sort of thing, right? So that's why when you buy a vintage amp, whether it's a Boogie or a Marshall or whatever, generally speaking, right, the ones that have the original transformers and such go for much more because a lot of the sound is tied up in those transformers. This Mark II DRGX has, Mark IIc Plus DRGX has an ungodly giant transformer in it. It's freaking huge, right? It's massive, right? And that's part of the sound, you know. Mesa got, I think, a little slimmer with some of the transformers later in the Mark line, like into the Mark IV line. Not saying that Mark IVs sound bad, right? But a lot of people have said like, oh, well, Mark IVs don't sound like a 2C Plus because the transformers are different, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is one that, again, you can't really do anything about, but is important to understand because it's about the design of the amp. So on the old Mesas, on like a 2C Plus like this, you have two volumes. You have a drive and you have an overdrive, right? So volume 1 here, all the way on the left, so your controls are volume 1, treble, bass, middle, master 1, lead drive, and lead master. Okay, so on volume 1, which is all the way over here, you have an option to set the initial gain level here. And then you have an option to do the lead drive over here is like an overdrive. So it's cascading gain circuits. An amp that maybe this might make sense to some of you if you know what a Fender ProSonic is. It's an amp that was made in the late 90s by Fender for about 5 years or so. It was designed by Bruce Zinke to compete with Mesa Boogie. And it had a cascading gain like that. It had drive 1 and drive 2. And drive 1 was like a preamp drive, and then drive 2 was like adding a little bit of gain, but adding like compression and thickness and saturation. It's kind of the same thing here, right? It's almost like drive 1, drive 2, or like gain and overdrive, or drive and overdrive, right? So you have an option to get a lot more gain and saturation out of an old 2C Plus because you can control this volume 1 and you can control this volume 2, right? Lead drive, in order to get the right gain that you're looking for, the right level of saturation you're looking for, compression, etc. On newer Mark series amps, whether it's the Mark VII, the Mark V, or the JP2C, gain 1, volume 1 right here that you have a knob for here, you do not have on these amps. They don't exist. Now you might be like, well, what do you mean, Mike, they don't exist? Answer, it's in the manual, and Randall Smith has explained it, that these have preset values of volume 1 already drilled into them, like it's already preset, right? Not drilled literally, but you know what I mean? Like it's already preset. So like you can't control both the gain and the lead drive, right? You have to just deal with whatever the volume 1 setting is. And then when you see gain here on these channels, that's actually the overdrive. And if you look in, if you have a if you have an Axe-Fx, a fractal Axe-Fx, you will see that reflected in the Axe-Fx also. If you look at the levels for the JP2C, DSP and stuff like that, if you don't use Ideal, it will just have gain. It won't have gain and overdrive like the 2C Plus models do, right? So that's the difference, because that's true to the amp. Now in the Fractal, you can go to the Ideal settings and then still change this for these amps, which is very cool, right? Because that's the Ideal setting. But my point is to say, what makes the 2C Pluses and the old Mesas so vicious is one, the transformer, like I mentioned, and two, it's that you can set independently the input gain here and then the overdrive here. On the newer ones, you can't. They're preset. So what you're really doing here, again, is tweaking the overdrive level, lead drive. That's really what you're tweaking when you're tweaking here. This is already preset. So that is, I think, the main difference. Now you might be like, oh, I'm so bummed, like I have an inferior mark or whatever. Like, no, it's not. It's just different, right? To be completely honest, I love the JP2C. I think the JP2C is an amazing amp. It sounds great. It doesn't sound as vicious and open as this amp, but it's a great amp. It's just a little more compressed. It's a little more smooth, right, etc. But and you know, you don't have the volume 1 adjustment, but you don't need it because there's enough gain on the overdrive here that, you know, you can do it. But what makes these 2C Pluses so special is that you can manipulate both of those. And that would be on a Mark III also, right? And on a Mark II also, right? I think Mark IVs might have them too. I've never owned a Mark IV, so I can't say. I'm not sure. But that's what makes these older Marks, in a lot of people's opinion, that's what makes these amps much, quote unquote, better, right? Or more aggressive, or to say that, oh, they had more gain, or they sound more, you know, in your face, and that's why, because of that volume 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of little sound samples, right? I'm going to play the Mark VII, and you know, I'm going to kind of tweak through some of the gain options here. I'm going to do it on the Mark IIc mode here, so you can hear. I'm not going to mess with these two channels, okay? Just the Mark IIc mode. And then I'll go over to the real 2C Plus here, and I'll mess with the drive levels, and you'll be able to see kind of what I mean, okay? So stand by, and I'll be right back to show you exactly how this unfolds. Okay guys, it's Mike from Eldorado Guitars, and I am back. So on this demo, I tried to use a very kind of standard guitar. So this is a PRS Standard 22 from 2006. It's got Seymour Duncan 78 pickups in it. So pretty middle of the road, right? Just regular old rockin' guitar. We're plugged into the Mark VII. We're on the 2C channel. And I've got this mic'd up the same way I had the other video mic'd up, which is an SM57 on the bottom right speaker and a 609 on the bottom left speaker. And we'll check this out and see what we get. I'm going to zoom in for this part on the controls of the amp so that you can see me manipulating them. And then we'll go ahead and do the demo. I'll do a little bit of kind of playing a riff or two just to give you like some kind of constant, you know, between the two amps. And then I'll just jam out a little bit just so you can kind of hear like the feel, right? So let's go ahead and get to it. Here we go. Okay guys, I'm back. So as you can hear, those two amps are pretty different, right? And you noticed hopefully how much difference on the OG Mark II that you can, with the adjustment of the volume one and the lead drive, right? You saw me manipulating that around. I was pulling a lot of the push-pulls. At one point I did the trick, which is turn the presence up and then compensate with the 6600 slider, right? I did a little bit of that. And I think I did that on this one too at the end. Yeah, the presence on this channel is up and the 6600 is down. So you can hear like both great amps, right? It's not to say that the Mark VII is bad or the Mark IIc is better or anything like that, right? And a lot of people will say to me, Mike, is a 2C really worth $10,000? No, it's not, right? Like, I mean, it is on the market, right? But is it worth it to you as a player? Probably not, right? I think, though, it's an important thing to note that when you're thinking about buying a Mark series amp, you just really need to think about which type do you want, right? Do you want one of the older Mark series amps, like a 2 or a 3? Or like I said, I think a 4 still has it. I'm not sure. So somebody correct me in the comments. I don't know. But at least I know Mark IIs and Mark IIIs, have that volume one for the initial gain, right? Gain and then the lead drive, right? Which I think personally allows you to get a much greater combination of sounds, right? You could see how you can manipulate it around. You can do lower gain sounds. You can control really hot pickups, or like really if you've got strap pickups and you want to really boost them up, you have the opportunity to do that with the volume one, right? As opposed to on something like the Mark VII or the JP2C or the Mark V, you're not going to have that option, right? You're stuck with the preset value that's stored in here, which I think Randall Smith said is something like 6.5 or 6 or something. I can't remember, but he says there's an interview somewhere where he tells you what it is. Somebody can look it up. So I think you just need to decide, and you might be saying, well, like Mike, it sounds like these two things are pretty great. Why would I choose the Mark VII? Answer, modern features, right? Modern features. This is a vintage amp, right? So The benefit of a vintage amp is those old transformers and then some design things like this that used to exist, right? The benefit of an amp like the Mark VII is you've got like reverb for each channel, you've got a cab clone, you've got direct outs, you've got the IR loader, I think, in here that you can choose between different IRs, right? So it just depends on what you want to do, right? Like maybe adjusting the input gain is not really that important to you. Maybe you're like, hey, I would much rather have, you know, all these other more modern features. This has basically 9 marks in it, right? Between all the different modes, right? There's 9 different modes. This only has 2 modes, right? It's got regular and drive, right? And the lead channel, right? And that's it. So it really just depends on what you want to do, right? If you said to me, Mike, I don't want to buy a $10,000 2C Plus, but I like the option to do the volume on the lead drive, what should I buy? My answer would be a Mark III. I would get a Mark III. Get a Mark III Blue Stripe, or, you know, another thing you can do is you can get a Mark IIB. If it has the loop mod, then it will sound very close to a C+. You can also, a Mark IV, I think, is a good choice, right? If it has those features, which I think it does, and if you want to manipulate that, right? So again, it's not to say that one is good or one is bad or whatever, but there is a notable difference, right? So that's why when people are like, you'll hear people on the internet say like, oh, well, these new ones don't sound like the old 2C Pluses. The answer is no, they don't, because they have different transformers and they have different, you know, setups, but that doesn't mean that they're not great amps, right? I love the JP2C. The JP2C has a fixed volume 1 level, but I love it. It's a great amp. It's an incredible amp, right? And I'm trying to buy another one. So so again, it's not to say that one is good or bad, but just think about which style you want, right? There's pros and cons to each. And I just wanted to point that out because I don't think in my last video that I made that clear. So thanks for hanging out, everybody. Again, this is Mike with Eldorado Guitars. If you like this video and would like to see more, please like and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 followers for my little channel. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.